Hi, we're sisters Brenda and Elaine.
Welcome to the Body Wealth Podcast, a space for conversations about the wealth that really matters.
Your best health.
I really enjoyed this conversation with Susan. She was so thoughtful about her experience having her brother's medical power of attorney.
Yeah, for me, this conversation really represented a study in being in service to those that you love. And though you want to do it, sometimes it can take a toll on us personally. So let's get into our conversation with Susan.
Welcome, Susan. It's really great to see you today. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's really lovely being here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, good. Thank you. We would love for you to share what you would like to introduce yourself to our listeners.
I'm Susan Scott. I live in Durham, North Carolina. I am a daughter of two fantastic people, and oldest sister to three other individuals. And I am the mother of two daughters who are independent, spirited, and who impress me every day. And I happen to work in the public media industry.
Good. Thank you.
Well, excellent. Well, to get started, I will say, because Brenda and I have experienced this as well as you, the loss of a sibling is devastating. We experienced it as young children with our older sister, but you experienced this as an adult. And in fact, were requested by your brother to serve as his medical power of attorney. So what can you tell us about your brother and the special relationship that you two shared?
Yes. So in that party of four children that my parents gave birth to, I am the oldest. And my sister Cynthia, my brother Stephen, and I lost our youngest brother, Stuart. His name was Stuart Scott. And he happened to be one of the most popular sportscasters on ESPN for a good long time, and fought a very public battle with a rare appendiceal cancer for a long time until he fought in a different way from a different plane. But you are right. He and I were extremely close. When my sister Cynthia was born, she was the second. I adored her. You know, my parents said I was a tiny, tiny little toddler, and I did everything I could for her. And then when my brother Stephen was born, my parents said I just tossed Cynthia to the curb and focused all of my efforts and energy on Stephen, to Cynthia's, I don't know, detriment. And then, so Stuart was the last child who was born. You know, you could see where this was going.
Yes.
He might not have been my ideal had they continued having children, but they stopped with Stuart. And I, at 7 years old, I poured myself into this little boy. And that didn't really end in our entire lives together. We were exceedingly close. We were very similarly emotionally situated. And he was my closest intimate, and dare I say, given the responsibilities that he gave me, I was his closest intimate.
Tell us about those responsibilities. It's great that you were there for him, but he gave you medical power of attorney. How did that come about?
Yeah, he did. There's a cute little story, and anyone who's listening or hears this knows that there's a dance with siblings, right? You all have your role. And given what I just described about the nature of our relationship, he could call me and complain or fuss or whatever, and sometimes I would tolerate it and sometimes I wouldn't. But when he was first diagnosed with cancer, he called. It was very emotional, and he was terrified. He said, I'm gonna, I've got cancer. I'm gonna, And the decision in that moment, as an oldest sibling, was, you could get sucked into this too, because you're terrified. I was terrified.
Right.
No one would. He's hale and hearty and loud, and we've planned the next 20 years of family vacations. But what I did instead is I went into really a lighthearted mode. And I'm like, man, okay, all right, look, people are diagnosed with, I'll be delivering your eulogy. I'll be 97 and you'll be 90. That's what's going to happen. And so that
Mhm.
really that eased both of us into just kind of
Mhm.
a more stable place so we could talk through the details. It was not in that moment that he asked me to take on his medical power of attorney, but a couple of years later, after fighting cancer and understanding the rare nature of his cancer, recognizing that the people diagnosed with his cancer didn't have long runways and he'd outlasted most of them that he'd met.
Well,
It's that sobering place that we all get to in our lives. We had a long conversation. The gist of it was, here's who I trust, and this is really critical, and I'd like you to have my medical power of attorney. My reaction emotionally was, I'm still maintaining that 97 years, 90-year mindset. And in retrospect, I'm glad that that's the mindset that I maintained for those
why?
remaining years. Essentially, knowing what I know now, he was asking me to be the person who determined when, on his behalf, based on his input,
Mhm.
when is enough enough?
Mm.
When, and if I am not able to say that it is enough, will you be strong enough to say it is enough for me?
And did you hesitate at all when he
No, no.
asked? Not
When
at
he
all.
asked,
You knew.
no, no. That was my dude, man. I mean, that's listen, and my family is very clear on that. We laugh and joke about it. He was close to all of us, and I'm not doing anything that distinguishes his love of me from his love of my parents or our siblings. The four of us are tight. We're tight.
Mhm.
Um, but our trust was just a different plane.
Well, also, as you said, we each have our role,
We
in a
do.
family and as siblings, and so,
Mhm.
everyone probably understood that that was a role for you, I can
L
imagine.
Yeah, our dad, uh, introvert, strong sense of justice, integrity is what he leaned on always, and, he was an oldest and I was an oldest, and when I was little, my dad, much like maybe a lot of moms or dads, he said, "Look, we're oldists. You're an oldest like me," and he said, "That means you have a real responsibility to set an example for your sister and your brothers." I continue taking it very, very seriously. I do.
Mm.
Yeah,
Elaine, that reminds me. So Elaine is essentially the middle child
Yes.
because Renee
and
was
that's how
the
I view
oldest.
myself, even though I am the oldest of the living children since I was age 7, but because those first 7 years or 6 years, you get that identity, so I never view myself as the oldest.
I get that.
Yeah, well, but I view her as the oldest because she was the quintessential big sister for me. Like, so I was 5, Elaine was 6, and Renee was 7 when Renee died.
Wow.
And my mom found a letter that Elaine had written, I guess at 6 years old, saying, I don't want to be the oldest, which
Oh.
is just so telling on so many
Oh.
Mm.
levels because she was seeing
Yes.
that shift in
Yes.
responsibility as a 6-year-old. She
Yes.
was processing that.
I don't remember that. I don't remember that at all, but, in some ways, I did feel like I had to be the oldest, though I never felt that I was the oldest, if that makes sense.
I mean, what it says to me, and obviously it's subjective, is that, your parents did such a good job of conveying, I'll call it roles. And I will bluntly say, if you're oriented this way, there is something special about being the oldest,
Mhm,
right? And I
Mhm,
would
most
imagine,
definitely.
never having had this experience, I'd have to ask Cynthia and Stephen, is there something special about being the middle? Yes, somebody's come before you to encourage you, to
yeah.
tell you what to do, right? To tell on you, all
To
of
guide
that,
the way,
to
to
guide
guide
the
the
way.
path,
Yes, yes,
yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. And you
so
appreciated having that for your 7 years. Or 6
Yes,
mhm,
years. Yes, yes.
yes,
mhm.
most definitely. So, as you served in this role for your brother, and I know it was a while, if I remember, because I was a big fan of your brother, I'll say.
Oh,
And
cool.
I know that he fought this fight for a while. How did you go through the process of figuring out with him what it was that he wanted so that you could feel like you were making the right decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question because as I indicated, I not really sure I knew more than whatever I'd heard in a movie or seen in a movie. I knew that it was important. I will say it's very sobering when you visit someone in a hospital and they've had multiple surgeries or they're on the back end of treatments that really take a lot out of them. And he was very weak in the hospital, right? If you're in the hospital, you cannot function in your home or in your life. And
Right.
so um, we mostly only had that conversation when he was in the hospital. And we never had it in front of anyone, right? It's the two of us doing
Mhm.
what we do, watching a recorded show or movie or something, or talking about our kids. And he never brought it up. So I had to bring it up.
Mhm.
And the way I handled it was look, kind of matter of fact, if you're in this mental or physical state, how do you want me to proceed with decisions? And so I would ask him based on some treatments that I knew about. So, what amount of physical impairment could you live with? Right?
Mm.
And we'd talk through, and it was always for me kind of arm's length, almost a third party thing. I
Mm.
cannot speak for him, but I would imagine from his perspective, it wasn't an easy conversation because he's experiencing a thing that leads him closer
Mhm.
to whatever is the state he feels he can live in. And we talked about mentally because, like a lot of people, he had real reactions to certain drugs, and some of those reactions, things like hallucinating dreams. And so when we'd have the conversations about um, with what amount of mental
Mm.
incapacity could you live, he was wise enough to say, maybe mental incapacity, but at one point he said, how much depression could I live with? Right.
Mm.
So he
Mhm.
was insightful enough to recognize if I don't feel like I'm enough of myself,
Do I want to?
do I
Mm.
want to? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
can you just define medical power of attorney for our listeners? I'm sure most people know, but like
Yeah.
really what decisions does it entail? What does it mean?
Yes, it's I think that's a great question. Um, the movies are not wrong. Um, and individuals have a choice of what level or degree of decision making they want to um, impart or
Mhm.
convey. A medical power of attorney, though, is a legal document that in his case, he had a lawyer draw it up. It did require a witness, and for hospitals and doctors to take it seriously, it does have to be notarized, right? It needs to be witnessed by someone,
Mhm.
and a medical power of attorney can um, it essentially says that the person to whom you are conveying this responsibility is speaking for you when you are not able to speak for yourself,
Mhm.
when doctors and medical personnel determine that you are not able to speak for yourself. If you again regain the ability to speak for yourself, you then speak for yourself.
Okay.
So there is again, I'm not a lawyer and I only know that particular document. But that was also comfortable to me because dude, I don't want to be on the hook for you your whole life.
Right.
You grown. But it does say that you make decisions up to and including um, continuing life maintaining support of,
Mm.
I'll call it artificial, I'm sure there's a medical term for it.
Mhm.
So, taking that on is obviously a huge responsibility, and I'm sure there's a lot of other interested parties surrounding you. Did anyone kind of question this arrangement that you and your brother made?
There may be people who questioned more privately.
Mm.
He was pretty straightforward with most people. I do want to shout out his girlfriend at the time, Kristen. Man, she was a beast. She gave the greatest, most loving, most attentive care. My parents didn't question it. You think of who the interested parties are. And my siblings didn't question it. And his friends, he had his closest friends knew. I think the people who question it the most, who are supposed to question it, whether you're there with them in person or remotely, doctors and surgeons and hospitals, right?
Okay.
So you
Well,
have to have that document at the ready to be able to email it or text it so that they can see it. They won't, you can't just say, I have this
Yeah,
person's medical power of attorney. And so I
right.
think you
that's
should.
good actually that you can't just say.
I think the other thing that it's important to call out is it activated when he was rushed to the hospital on an emergency basis. And it's generally in an emergency basis when he cannot speak for himself,
Right.
right?
Okay.
Yeah. So there were times that doctors wanted to confer about what is the best treatment. He and I would talk about different treatments. I got to know um, his most important doctor best. As an aside, that doctor loved him. He has a global practice, and he came to Stewart's funeral, right? You know,
Mm.
and so you develop. I didn't have that relationship, but I developed a relationship where that doctor knew me, and I knew that doctor. It opens doors you don't want to step through, but it is part of the process of knowing was the ability to say, okay, if you do this, does this permanently compromise this person? Or would we expect that this treatment would lead them back to their sense of normalcy?
Because you're not a doctor, right? So that had to be kind of challenging, some of those conversations with the doctors to gather the information you needed to then make a decision. Can you
It,
tell us more about some of those conversations?
I can. One of the things that I learned during that period of time that I now use today is it's a strange toggle because you know what your person has said are their outer limits, but to get at right what's in the core of this, um, a couple of questions are always: does he need this? I'm paraphrasing, to live. Are you advising this as a natural course of treatment? Is this remediation that gets us back to something? Or you can never ask a doctor, what would you do? Because they will back away from that.
Yeah.
But, and I hope lots of people use this. If this was your father, cousin, brother, son, spouse, what would you advise? Right?
Mhm.
You make it neutral, make it safe for them to say. Also, if they're paying attention, it thrusts them into their emotional caring space.
Right.
And hopefully, what you get from them is as good a piece of advice as you could trust. So
Right.
those are the kinds of questions. You're right. It's thorny. I mean, look, he's gone. Let's laugh about it. Sometimes there are decisions like, "Ooh, I hope this man wakes up and is in his right mind after this." Right? "Ooh,
Right.
please don't come for me emotionally if you
Right.
don't like something."
Well, it's
Well,
good to
that
have
leads
humor.
us,
Yeah.
yes, for sure, but leads us
It
to this
is.
because this is about you a little bit too. And, I know you had to go through a grieving process after, obviously, but also probably leading up to, your brother's passing. And how did you You manage that.
I wish that my answer to that question was, I would say, more inspiring. I was a single parent.
Mm,
My daughter that I share with my ex husband was in middle school.
mm,
She too loved her Uncle Stuart. They had a special relationship, and I think he had that with all of his nieces and nephews. And so keeping that from her required me to keep it twixt the ditches, right? To just keep it
mm,
on the straight and narrow. And because Stuart was a well-known person, because he had a more complicated environment and assets and than
mm,
I will have, uh, I was busy around Stuart's activities, and I had my own work.
mm.
So I was distracted, and bluntly, he also gave me, when we reached that point, he gave me funeral instructions. So I was busy. Um, I have to admit that this is, grief comes in all stages.
Right.
I didn't wholly grieve until the past year. And it's been 9 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what was it that allowed you, after 9 years, to finally grieve?
Strangest thing. I annually get together with the same girlfriends on January 1st, and we plot our year, right? I think of what is my word for the year. We map our, here are our goals. Not a lot of goals. And we do the whole thing. We cut out pictures from magazines. It's like grown-up lady craft camp. I'm a hot yoga practitioner, and that might be the only thing that got me through Stuart's death, and I've been that for 15 years. But as I was doing this for 2024, I realized I wasn't connecting to something, and it hit me. Oh my goodness, this is going to sound odd. Why didn't I know having someone's medical power of attorney meant I would be the person who would decide when doctors did no more? So
Mm.
the awareness that I am in grief only happened at the beginning of this year.
Wow.
And I burst into tears with my girlfriends, and I shared with them. Some knew him, some know of him. Uh, just the importance of, and so do all of you have your medical power of attorney? Who knows who is responsible for you? Um, yeah, it's been a long process. The other thing that I'm grateful for is I get to keep Stuart alive in a very positive way. When he died, um, his employer, ESPN, and an organization that Stuart had done a lot of volunteer work with, the V Foundation, which was named for Jim Valvano. Unfortunately, Jim Valvano had cancer, also died. His family created the Jimmy V Foundation, and the Jimmy V Foundation and ESPN developed a Stuart Scott Memorial Cancer Fund. And
Yay.
over the years, I've begun doing a lot of volunteer work to raise money for that fund. And that fund focuses on closing the gaps in um, cancer treatment disparity for Black people.
Oh,
So that has been
fantastic.
so emotionally satisfying, so satisfying to do.
And do they fund research? What do they do to close that
Yeah,
gap?
oof, they do fund research. Most research around everything, including cancer, focuses on Caucasian people and white people. And this particular fund within the V Foundation, the Stuart Scott Memorial Cancer Fund, focuses exclusively on cancer research around cancers and how cancer impacts Black people. Moreover, it pulls in cancer researchers of color to
Ah,
explore the common cancers, right? Colon cancer, breast cancer, um, some pancreatic cancer, because
mhm.
Black people are multiple times more likely to die of their cancer diagnoses
Mhm.
than are non-white people. And this fund focuses on that exclusively. In fact, if I can go on with the commercial, um,
Please.
in the in the past 9 years, um, our fund, the Stuart Scott Memorial Cancer Research Fund, has given in grants more than $16 million to 52 cancer researchers focused on eliminating the disparities in cancer care and research for Black people. Now, that
Mhm.
$16 million has enabled those researchers to get started on their work. And then, as they've gone on over the past 9 years, to seek more donations and more funding for larger and larger pieces of research, the value of the research that they have done collectively today is, are you ready for this? This is a
Mm.
trip. The
What?
collective return on that $16 million investment is $2.1 billion. Billion.
Haha,
Because
yay.
yay is right. And there are Black people all over the world, right? So this isn't limited to people of color in the
In the
United
US.
States. So the medical power of attorney is an emotional drag that you might or might not be aware of. But in this particular case, it is never a burden to think about my brother and to talk about him, because it is his spirit. I'm going to share and disclose what's going on. I can be a
Mhm.
fighter because I have a great network. My sense of him as a networker who is really invested in lifting people, that continues, right, with this cancer research.
He has inspired this because so many people know him. I'm sure a great amount of that money has been raised just because his name has been on it.
I think so.
Right.
Secondly, this is our mission as well.
Right,
Reducing health disparities.
right.
I don't look at it as a commercial.
I'd like to say one other thing about medical powers of attorney, and that is, look, years ago, I think that people felt, oh, I have to have a lawyer to do that. You can go onto the internet
Yeah.
and grab a medical power of attorney form, and the only thing it will cost you is going to your bank or somewhere else to have someone stand with you and witness your decision making, right? And have someone notarize it, and then make sure that person who has that responsibility for you um, has a copy of it. And frankly, make sure you have the tough discussions. However,
Right.
because the one thing that I appreciate about Stewart, and I think anyone can appreciate it, if they're asking you to do this, they don't want you to get it wrong. So they conceivably, right, will be willing to say to you and to think to themselves, okay, what does this mean to me? And when would I want someone to make medical decisions? And in Stewart's case, having that medical power of attorney, it resulted in my having to make a decision that led to his death. But it doesn't always lead to that,
Mhm.
right? I think the interesting thing is it doesn't sentence anyone to being responsible for whether someone lives or dies. What it does is it pulls you in to have you be a partner in making decisions that you already understand would be the decisions that that person would make.
Mhm. You're honoring what
So
they would want.
Yes,
obviously is someone that you trust immensely and someone that you feel like you can communicate with, whether with words or without, or have this
right,
Mhm.
history of,
right,
have a
right.
history together. So that it is a great honor. It is a
It
great
is a
honor.
great honor. And I will say, we did joke about it in this way once. I said, look, we got to have this conversation because I don't want to show up at the pearly gates with you looking over Jesus' shoulder like, come
There
here, we
she
need
is.
to have a conversation. Right?
Right.
That is not, nobody was to be in that position, right?
No.
That was for the believers, right?
Right. Okay,
Right,
that makes me think something. So, of course, with Stewart, it was a no-brainer. You were gonna say yes to him asking you to have medical power of attorney, I think,
right,
based on what I've
right.
heard you say. Um, is there a circumstance in which if somebody asked you, you would say no?
I will tell you that beyond my mother, my sister, and my brother, And since I'm not married, I would very strongly not want to have that responsibility for anyone else, and I'll be blunt about what I think that is due to in my case. Um, Trauma,
Mhm,
right? Do you understand? Like,
mhm.
that's we think we wanna be God. And again, I will say that having that responsibility does not determine that you will decide, but you never know what's going to thrust someone in a position where you would need to work with doctors to decide, I don't want that responsibility beyond the people I love. So if I don't love you, right, if
Yeah.
I just know you and we're dear friends, I'm thinking about my best friend. She needs to have her siblings do that. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Because there's some judgment, no matter how many
there
conversations you
is,
have, at
there
some
is.
point when it's decision time, you're still having to make some judgment calls, right?
You are, it's not clean. And by clean, it's not 100%
Right.
straightforward. And so I live with no regrets about Stuart. It is a real, it's an emotion, there's an emotional
Well,
toll.
yeah, because I wonder, like, you say 9 years later you began the grieving process. Did serving in that role have something to do with that? First, did it affect the way that you were able to grieve? And then, second, did your expectations of what that was going to feel like and be like for you differ from what it actually was?
Ooh. We, what is the poem? The nub of the nub? You've just hit on the nub of the nub. Ah, so here's what happened. And anyone who paid attention to Stewart, he announced his cancer diagnosis, he fought it. Sometimes he was off the air, sometimes he was on the air. He's publicly stated how completely supportive and understanding ESPN was. There are times when he really shouldn't have worked, and he did work.
Mm.
And what that did was that trained all of us who knew and loved Stewart. Oh, this guy is Superman. No one ever thought Superman, but he had emergency room visits. He got home, he got better. This was just another emergency room visit one night. And I had a long conversation with the doctor, and by long, I mean 10, 15 minutes. Um, she laid out what was going on. I asked some questions. And one of my questions was, okay, if you do that, what does that mean for him and the quality of his life?
Good
And she
question.
said, that means he will be, I'm paraphrasing, he will be on a vent forever. He will always have this and that, and he will be, her term, really compromised. And she went on to list the internal loss that he was experiencing. And I said, I, of course, as anyone would, how do we keep him comfortable? And she said, we will definitely blah, 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 blah. Now, I'm not a doctor. So we're having this conversation. And when we finished, I said, okay, thank you very much. And she said, I'm sorry for your loss.
Mm.
This was a couple of hours before he died.
But she
So
was.
as a
Mm,
doctor,
mm,
she knew better than I did what I was doing, right?
mm.
What this decision, informed by Stuart's desires, what this would lead to.
And
I
was
knew
letting
how
you
he
know
and
too
was
in some
letting me
way.
know, right? He knew how he did not want to live. That would not have been living for him.
Mm.
So you ask the question, I was so freaked out by that. I didn't talk about that with anyone. I was afraid to share it because I really had to wrestle for a couple of years with, did I kill him?
Mm.
Do you understand?
Mm-hmm. I do.
So it
Um,
felt awkward in my head, right? In my head, right? Because
Right.
what, like in my, it's like, whoa. So I'm good, healthy today. I don't second guess, but I went through some period of time, like if I utter this aloud, probably everybody will know that like no, cancer is responsible for his death.
Yes,
Yeah.
Right?
exactly.
I was so grateful to have things that I had to do, right? Other work, life, blah, to not, because I couldn't stay in quiet moments and think about that, because that was a ruminating, oh my God, oh my
Mhm.
God, oh my God, oh my God. And I do wonder, had she, I don't know if it was positive or negative or neutral for her to say she had an obligation. She wouldn't have wanted to get off out of the discussion and have me not know,
Right.
right? So I do believe she was being helpful. This was what was in my head. So would I want? No, I don't want to have anybody's medical. It's a big responsibility. It's big, but it's also a caring thing on both ends of the spectrum to do. You don't want doctors making that decision for your
Mhm.
loved one, if right? And by the way, they will only make the decision with input from a legally recognized person. Right? So if you're single
Mhm.
and you have not identified someone who has your medical power of attorney, and you are in a situation where you cannot speak for yourself, your doctors can make whatever decision they think is best. And their Hippocratic oath has them working to save your life.
No
Yet
matter
your
what. No
life
matter what
might,
your life
no
is.
matter
Right.
what your life is, at the end of their, what I would always assume and characterize as an heroic effort to ensure, they're focused on life,
Right.
life saving.
Not
They're not,
quality.
not quality of life. That's each individual's total responsibility to have conveyed that.
So that's why we all need to put medical powers of attorney in place. But I
Right.
just also want to say thank you for the great gift of what you did for your brother. And
Mhm.
thank you for sharing this story because this is going to be so helpful to so many others who have not thought about this.
I hope so. I do.
I
I
really
really
know it will
do.
be.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me. But I also appreciate you inviting me in this year where I've had this awareness that this was both an honor and it's an obligation we all owe ourselves. So I appreciate having the chance to share about it.
We want to make sure that people who have to go through these situations can end up in less than 9 years, hopefully, as healthy as you are, as
Mhm.
you look and seem to be at this moment. But what got you to that? We talked with someone recently about release, and how were you able to release those feelings that you were having in the back of your mind?
Yeah, I'm glad that we've gone back to this. I have a therapist. I've had a therapist over the years, so I think that therapy is so. It's important to me. It's been important to my friends. I have a good group of friends, and by good group of friends, I have what we call a dime squad. Right, that's that tiny, tiny little circle of people locally, and my longtime best friend and another friend. Yes, I've got a nickel squad, which is bigger, and a quarter squad.
Right.
But I have people I trust who trust me, and we can speak frankly. I
Mm.
spend time when I'm walking being present. I look at leaves and flowers. I'm in the moment. And I think, without ruminating, a lot about what kind of day do I want to create in that day?
Mhm.
What kind of life do I want to create in the current year? Um, and so, I'm an intellectual. I'm in my head a lot, but I do things to ensure that I'm physically aware of where I am, um, and
Intentionality.
I'm
Uh,
intentional. I don't have one big thing. I wish I could say, "Oh, I won the lottery and all my problems were solved." No, um, I just have reached that stage of understanding that it's all before me, and that I'm responsible for my own happiness, period. And so I'm knitting together every day my happiest life.
What a
I
great
love
place to
that.
be.
Wow, it was such a pleasure to talk to Susan. She just has such a bright spirit, uplifting spirit. But what did you take away from the conversation we had with her?
Well, first, I just loved her energy, that she just seems like she's living a really intentional life, and it makes her super positive, or maybe vice versa. She's super positive and lives an intentional life. But on the main topic that we discussed, medical power of attorneys, I took away the fact that it's a gift to do that for someone, but also a really big burden. And so sometimes you have to say no, that it's something that you can do for your loved ones, but you can't just do it for anyone, because it cost her a lot
Yeah,
in mental
it took a
energy.
toll because when she said she didn't start grieving until very recently, which means it took her 9 years to actually release the weight of serving in that role. And I know that she's very glad that she was there to do it for her brother and doesn't regret it. But it did take a toll on her. And I'm just very happy to see her in the space that she is now, where she feels so good and is doing so much, which she has been doing for the community, for the Stuart Scott Memorial Cancer Research Fund is changing lives today. But I wanted to see her feeling good about herself. And that's what really made me happy to see that today with her. Thanks for listening. We hope this episode inspires you to increase your body wealth. If you like our show, please subscribe and tell a friend. For resources related to this topic, please see the show notes. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at Body Wealth Sisters.
The Body Wealth Podcast shares personal stories to inspire you. It does not constitute medical advice. For that, we encourage you to work with a trusted healthcare provider. We also want to remind you that the views expressed by our guests are their own. This podcast is dedicated to our mother, Jean Fernandez Barbour, who showed us what advocating for yourself really looks like.